I have been involved with a number of jury views in cases I have tried. It's always fascinating, but I never had to deal with the issue of the jury being told to be watch out or be aware for snakes on the ground. Usually it's snakes in the courtroom. So talk to me. How does the jury process this information after they've heard all of the testimony, especially the testimony from defendant and the kennel video, which we'll talk about?
I'm sure the judge gave many instructions, and the one fascinating thing is they just have to take a lot of mental notes and remember what they've heard. We've heard so much after so long, and that's part of the problem with either defending or prosecuting the case, that you have to have help the jury members, at least when they're walking through these places, remember their respective narrative, because it's so much now, right? Not only are they hearing about it, but now they're smelling it, they're hearing, they're inside this place. But it's very curious. You make a great point of like, this is a very strange, one of these narratives doesn't make sense now that I'm being here, and we just don't know. I mean, we can have an idea, but we just don't know which way they're going to lean. But this is fascinating to me. But I also think it's the best way to come through to what I believe would be the best process for the jury to come to their best version of the truth, as we're taught, right? It's not the who the parties think is right. It's what the juries believe happened that ultimately matters.
And of course, we're going to hear a lot from the defense, and I can tell you, and you know that the burden of the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You know, in California, there's that charge that you may think that somebody did it. You may be kind of convinced he did it. You may be pretty sure in your mind he did it, but has the state proven it beyond reasonable doubt? So talk to me about this in light of the kennel video, which I think is the whole case basically for the prosecution, that Paul took the surreptitious video that his dad didn't know about, and then his dad spent months, if not more, a year, denying that he'd ever seen his wife and son after they had dinner at the cabin. Talk to me about that in light of this jury view.
That's a huge deal. The jury's been thrown at them all these things about the defendant being a liar, like I stole things, I stole money, I'm dishonest, but I didn't kill my kids, and everything that I tell you and my wife, and everything that I'm telling you about what happened on this particular day is true. This is huge because he's been denying it, and all of a sudden he's there, and the jury's going to be like, listen, man, if you're lying about this one particular thing, chances are you're really hiding something huge. I think it's a bombshell. I mean, to the extent it's a smoking gun, it's a 1A and 1B. It's probably like 1B or C. It's an enormous deal.
Yeah, and additionally, with regard to that, the jurors, I don't know the religious orientation or what, but a feeling from people I've talked about said, hey, no one is going to allow Alec Murdaugh to escape a guilty verdict here. Why? Because they feel that it was God's will, perhaps, that indeed his son was taking the surreptitious video with 2% left in the phone, and therefore, why would that happen unless it was meant to be that the jury would hear that? Is that a viewpoint you think that could be echoed in that jury room?
It could be echoed, but it shouldn't have any legal weight, right? Because that is it's basically putting, how do I say, putting intent through the lens of faith, and we're supposed to see these things, in a kind of in a sterile way. What are we looking at without thoughts of God or any religious thing or any philosophy, really? Like, yes, maybe it's meant to be, maybe, oh, how lucky, how fortunate, but ultimately that's things that should not be considered in the jury room. And if it were to come out that did come out, it could be a basis for a retrial.
So let's talk about something else. Okay, another bombshell that we're going to talk about with regard to the prosecution. Okay, I'm the prosecutor. I argue that video. I argue the line. I argue the fact that, there's been a big deal about what you see Alec Murdaugh wearing, and the state has, or the defense has talked about how the crime scene was mucked up in many regards. But you know who had control of the clothes that he was wearing, that blue shirt and those shoes? That man sitting right there, Alec Murdaugh. You know who controlled the .300 Blackout weapon that he bought from his cousin that his family never saw afterwards? That man, Alec Murdaugh. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, Alec, I don't want to be in Alec's shoes or his defense attorney's shoes. There's a lot of things pointing at him. We've been saying since the beginning, it's circumstantial evidence. at best. And I think all of us, including my colleague Nima, we were both saying, like, we think this is going to be defense. But the more that's come out, I think the prosecution has done a good job of getting the jury enough to go, listen, there could maybe no reasonable doubt with regards to how much he's lying, right? How much he's in control, how much he's tried to control the narrative, but is failing at it. He's being caught with lies. He's being pointed out, like, you have control over these very, very important things. And yes, there's question marks, but we just don't believe you. And he's becoming, I don't want to say the villain of this, as much as he's trying to come off innocent and a victim, he has not helped himself by, one, the lies, and two, by the circumstances of he's controlling all these very, very important things that the prosecution, I think, is doing a very good job of going, you're the only one that can do this. You're the only one that can control this stuff. No one else can. It had to be him.
Okay, so let me tell our viewers what's happening right now. Yesterday when we left you, Alan Wilson, the Attorney General for South Carolina, the Attorney General himself, elected official, came in and questioned the last witness. Then the jury had a jury view this morning, and now you see that the attorneys were all discussing with the judge something at sidebar. We don't know what. We will obviously know later. Maybe it'll come out. It looks like Creighton Waters just walked back up to the court, probably, although the judge is smiling. I have to say, the judge is smiling. So, after a long trial like this, some of the pressure does come off. Judge Newman, who has been in wonderful control of his courtroom, whether he liked his rulings or didn't like his rulings, his affect, his tone, and all, and allowing the attorneys to try their case and understand when attorneys open the door to bad evidence, despite his rulings, and he was willing to reconsider. So now we're just watching him drink his coffee. I feel like a voyeur here in some way, because the attorneys are going back. Ron, let me just ask you one more question with regard to this. What do you think they were talking about at sidebar?
Why is the state attorney general there? It could be I'm speculating, but I have a feeling that they're trying to get the judge to put some type of parameters or instructions as to what the jury can and can't do about what they found out yesterday. Because it's, again, I think the visceral experience of being there is going to be powerful one way or the other. And I think the state, through its top attorney, top elected official, enforcer, is trying to make sure, like, listen, we want to make sure this stuff hits home. Please don't exclude things or tell them to think things that they're not supposed to think, that we think that would help the prosecution.
And of course, there was a court reporter that went to the scene with the jurors. If the jurors had a question, the judge said yesterday they could ask him. So we don't know if there is a record, but we don't know if the jurors had any questions that they then asked the judge. Every judge does it differently. In cases I've been involved with, it was only the foreperson that was allowed to send the questions that the jury wanted to the judge or to the attorneys that got to answer. In some places, the attorneys get to answer questions that they're put forward. So we don't know. Do you think the juries had any question as we're waiting for the closing statements to begin? And of course, the prosecutor will be going first. Do you think what questions the jurors could have had?
It always happens that they come up with the questions typically that you never ever kind of anticipate. It could be anything as innocuous as, what was the weather? I forgot about that. Or it could be something more important like, can we get a map so that when we go to the deliberation, we can make our own notes about what we saw, what we think is important. They probably asked, like, can we take pictures with our phone? Things like that. Things that to lawyers we would never think of, but to lay people, and when you listen to these questions, like, oh, that makes sense, from your perspective. It's always very curious to see the jury questions in the middle of a trial.
Yeah, the jury is coming in, I believe, right now. Also interesting, they would have driven past the place where we heard a lot about the phone being thrown, being chucked, and whether it lighted up or not yesterday. One wonders whether or not they stopped there, or at least it was pointed out to them. Sure. We'll find out, because there was a pool photographer, a pool videographer, and reporters who were allowed to visit the scene afterwards, and it will become part of the record.